Welcome, everyone. Also, everyone joining online. My name is Marie-Josephine Hinz, and I have the pleasure of guiding you through the next couple of hours. AI for low-carbon cities. That is not just the title of our event, but an emerging field full of promise and, dare I say, potential peril. Tackling the climate crisis at the city level is key, as cities are both major contributors to GHG emissions and also vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. Because almost 70% of the world's population is projected to live in urban areas by 2050. Artificial intelligence is not new. What is new, however, is the pace and the scale of its development, the amounts of data and analytical tools we have. So, if there is a technology that can help us better understand, forecast, manage and simulate, detect and plan, why not use it for good? In our case, towards livable, thriving, just, regenerative cities. Well, all that glitters is not gold. The risks are not negligible. So, AI is more than algorithms. It is a technology with adverse environmental and social consequences. If I have learned anything in my research about this emerging field, it is that we need to bring together diverse perspectives to this conversation. So I'm excited that so many of you are here today. Let's see who is in the room. So by show of hands, who is working for public sector? Just raise your hand if you do. A few. Yeah, thank you. And how about, are you a student? Are you currently training anything AI or climate related? Yeah, also quite a few. Welcome. And everyone who works in a startup or a private sector organization. Wonderful, thank you. Any researchers here? Fellow researchers? Great. And anyone in politics or policy making? Maybe, yeah, everyone, kind of. Great. That's such a great mix. Thank you so much. And another show of hands, please. Who of you is working on artificial intelligence or machine learning? Yeah, great, thank you. And who is working on climate issues mainly? Great. You will have plenty of opportunity to get to know each other more. We will have a big networking session with refreshment and snacks later, so you can get to know each other. In a moment, I will hand the floor to Franchesca Bria for a keynote speech, and we will take a few questions directly afterwards. Then Miriam Regal will tell us about how AI can help to save city trees. And then we will dive deeper during a panel discussion. During this discussion, we will also open it for questions, so you can already bring in yours during that time. Already, I want to thank the entire organizing team, especially Hubert Beroche, who is the founder of Urban AI, and unfortunately he can't be here today. And also Aurel von Richthofen, a fellow Urban AI member, who has helped me a lot organizing this event. For those of you who don't know, Urban AI is an international think tank and community devoted to fostering the exchange and collaboration on all things urban AI related. And you can also join, and feel free to approach Aurel later or myself. Yeah, thanks, Aurel. And of course, a big thank you also to Veran and also Christine and Lucas from the Heinrich-Böll Foundation. And actually, on the 29th January, you can come back here and have another round of discussion, because there will be a big conference looking at AI and sustainability. So, as I understand, the registration is still open, and you can find all the details online. Okay. Now, it is my honor to introduce you to our keynote speaker, Franchesca Bria. Franchesca is an innovation economist and digital policy expert. She is working at the intersection of technology, geopolitics, economics, and society. She is the president of the Italian National Innovation Fund and professor at the UCL Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose. She has worked with a new institute in Hamburg on the question of how cities can use data to become more democratic and sustainable. She has also been the CTO of the city of Barcelona. And I personally find her work not only inspiring, but path-defining. And as such, I'm excited to hear her perspectives on AI and low-carbon cities. The stage is yours.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yes, great. So thanks for the invitation. Very excited to be here in Berlin with lots of snow. I don't think this is normal. Climate change, always same problem. This is not the first slide, by the way. Like, actually, really not the first slide. Okay, let's start from scratch. So I think, well, first of all, this is obviously a very, very important topic, not only because we combine one of the most emerging and pressing, of course, social and human issue, which is the climate emergency, with on-the-ground work with technology such as artificial intelligence to achieve common goals, which is basically tackling, the most pressing social needs, but also because I really think, and this has been my work for many, many years, that a lot of change can happen from the ground up, starting with cities and citizens. So for me, cities have always been a kind of laboratory for democratic and sustainable innovation. So my presentation will be mainly based on my work as Chief Technology Officer in the city of Barcelona from 2016 to 2020. Then I went to work on similar topics for the UN, defining the Digital Cities program at global level, also interacting with many different CIOs and try to shape the policies in the field. And in the last couple of years, I've been working with the city of Hamburg on data sharing for public interest and continuing, let's say, to have cities, although my work at the National Innovation Fund and my work with the European Commission obviously happens on different scale. I always bring the city with me, because for me, that's a very powerful way to apply things, to get things done, to really do it, and to, of course, involve citizens and communities. So as you know, we are addressing, the word of the year of 2023 was polycrisis. And I think this is absolutely the new normal. So we continue to face many emergencies. Probably in 3 years' time, we passed from crisis to crisis. Now we have, wars going on very close to us. We have public crisis, we have the energy crisis, inflation, questions around jobs, questions around, of course, the Anthropocene and the climate emergency. And all these different issues, of course, are, for me, a defining historical opportunity to rethink and to redesign the economy and society. I think we shouldn't waste this moment where, of course, many of us are also worried because people are losing trust in public institutions. They're losing trust in, seeing a positive view for the future. And sometimes, going back to, for example, vote for right-wing populism, which is a very, very strong problem, I think, again, in Europe. But I think if we understand this is a moment in time when we can really move to a digital carbon neutral future and start radically doing things different. And I think, obviously, if we look at the European level, I think the opportunity of having the Green Deal on one side and having to implement the Green Deal, which is an agenda, of course, a bit weakened, also that from the right-wing, policies we are seeing around the continent, and on the other side, shaping the digital decade, making sure that Europe not only doesn't lag behind this digital revolution, but can also, let's say, define a new direction for the digital age that's centered around democracy, rights, and, inclusion for all citizens. I think it can be a very, very a very important challenge. So this doesn't move. Shall I point where? Oh, okay, fantastic. So, of course, when we talk about the climate emergency, when we talk about the big challenges we're facing, we always have the elephant in the climate room, that is the built environment. It was said before in the introduction, 40% of global GHG emissions come from cities, and also 55% of developed countries' waste. So I think if we look at the data as well, we can say that the role of cities as global carbon sinks is absolutely critical, and that in cities we can prototype, we can put in motion, we can scale innovative projects that really try to move from a dumb linear petroeconomy to a smart regenerative bioeconomy. And if we look also in what's happening around Europe, just to stay at a European scale, I definitely think that some of the most interesting and radical projects are happening in cities, trying to redefine mobility, trying to redefine the use of public space. This is, for example, coming from Barcelona, was one of the biggest projects we worked on when I was in the government in Barcelona, and it's still going on. I don't know if you visit the city. This is called the Super Blocks, and basically the Super Blocks is a radical urban planning agenda that's removing cars from the city centers. I know this is very controversial in Germany. All the time I mention it here. I'm afraid there is someone in the room like raising their hands. And I also know you had some problems here in Berlin with mobility questions. So, but basically this has been really transformative for the city of Barcelona. And not only because you can obviously see an impact in the climate policy, in pollution, in the public health of people, but also because it's redefining not only mobility, but also public space and social infrastructures. So we really recuperated 10% of green areas and 20% of public space. And if you see, so this is a rendering of one of the new projects in the city of Barcelona. So these green axes, they're becoming, part of the super blocks. Of course, the super blocks have this agenda also of the, I don't really like it to call it like this, but the 15-minute city, so to talk about proximity and to talk about proximity to essential services. So again, it is also a social agenda. It's not only an environmental agenda. And we see these kind of projects happening in many cities around Europe, definitely. But I think we should be much more pushing it forward, because if you go there, you see how valuable this is and how transformative this is for the urban space. The combination for me of net zero, so very radical and ambitious environmental target, data, I will talk a bit about that, how I, perceive and how I define urban data as digital commons, and then democracy, meaning participatory democracy. The combination of these three elements make a possible urban scale agenda and a program for cities, I think, very exciting. When I was in Barcelona, we made a point of starting really from participation and democracy. And I can never say it, it is so important that communities are in charge. So one of the objectives we had when I was in the government was really shifting more power to the people. And we really meant it, because one of the problems is that if people don't trust, if they're not engaged, if they're not involved, if there is no ways to participate, it's very hard to, really bring forward these kind of projects, in particular when they are contentious, as all democratic projects are. So we put together what we call collective intelligence for participatory democracy, and the platform that I hope you know, which is called decidim.org. Actually, we are launching the new version today, and it also works for mobile. It's really great. And after we started this in Barcelona, it scaled globally, which for me is also like a showcase, because when we talk usually about open source software that's managed by communities, preserving privacy, and really owned by the people, usually people say, well, this is going to be very small scale. You can't really do it like that. No, actually, it can scale globally, and it can be used as an alternative to the big platforms. It can, and this is a proof that this can work. And now it's used in, like 100 or more cities around the world, but also by countries. And we have an instance in the European level for the Conference of the Future of Europe, so it's in all languages. It has already been used. And basically, this can serve for participatory processes, so people coming up with ideas, but also participatory budgeting, really devolving more democratic power to where the communities are, and also really then taking this project to the next level. I mean, I tell you that obviously politicians, because sometimes they ask me, but do people want to participate? Are they really willing to, to come on board and participate? Well, 70% of the policy that we rolled in the city of Barcelona came directly from citizens. And in my experience, sometimes and most of the time, the blockage is not in the people, but it's in the politicians. I mean, let's say in the system. So I think we also need to vote there in power people that are willing, to basically engage in this kind of exercises of real democracy. So as I was telling you, I conceive data as a public infrastructure, as a digital commons, as a common good that can create public value. And why do I stress this question? Because as you know, because many of you are researchers in the room and work on the ground, we have a lot of concentration of power when we talk about technology and data. So very few companies, I mean, Shoshana Zuboff talks about surveillance capitalism, but we have really concentrated power. And only a few companies really can use this data and then feed the artificial intelligence engines and have this computing power to then do something, meaningful with this data. So I believe, and we believed, and I think there is a movement now that believe that actually data can be used, and in the city scale, this is very, very, very clear to, improve the city for the better. And in Barcelona, we changed public procurement contracts. So, I mean, here you can see the IoT infrastructure of the city of Barcelona with the data lake, with the common ontology. I work in Hamburg, and they have a fantastic data infrastructure. I don't know about Berlin, but probably they do have a very good infrastructure. And so this can go from energy grids, water monitoring, transport, garbage collection. I mean, really in real-time data. If you have the data, you can manage the city in a very different way. And in order to make sure that this data, we pay taxes and we, deserve good public services, and also the data is also owned by the citizens that pay taxes. It seems very simple, but that's not the case, because usually the data stay with the providers. So in Barcelona, for instance, we put clauses in public procurement contracts, and these clauses allowed us to demand that data is owned by the public, that it becomes a public good. In the city of Hamburg, we tried something else, which is an experiment. We did a big data challenge, urban data challenge for micromobility. But then what we did is experimenting on business to society data sharing. And why? Because basically a lot of the important data, think about micromobility, all these scooters that are going around the city, or even just mobility questions or climate questions or housing, affordable housing, which is something that really is important for people, or many other issues that we want to tackle. Obviously, a lot of the precious, important data is in the hands of the companies. So we thought, okay, how do we make sure that this data can be shared for public interest, maintaining both, trade secret protection, so we don't actually, we facilitate actually smaller companies and startups to do something with data, but at the same time, we want to, of course, protect the data protection, the privacy, information self-determination of people. So maintaining both data protection and trade secret protection, why don't we make this data all public by default? And this is not open data. This is something that goes really beyond the open data. And in particular is the business to society, so getting back. So how about we get back this value to society, and then with this data we can do, for example, challenges or opening up to the best ideas. It could be a startup, it could be social entrepreneurs, it could be citizens, it could be journalists, it could be public enterprises, the City Lab, whatever. Whoever should be able to, contribute to the public good. I guess this seems easy, but it's not, because regulatory level is very complicated. We had, and I think this tells a little bit about also Germany and innovation. Sorry, can I make a joke? Because in the project we had like, I don't know, at a certain point, 10 lawyers working on this. And I was like, okay, I mean, obviously you are, you are very kind of cautious when it comes to law first, and you like regulation a lot, which is all good. I mean, I'm in favor of good regulation, but at the same time, we want to experiment, we want to make things happen, but also we want to unleash the innovation for the public interest, for the common good, and I think this is what's missing. And so if the law is paralyzing, or if it's not protecting the interests of people, but only the interest of the big companies, we do have a problem, and then we have to be able to change it, and that's what we try to do. Anyway, it was fun, and we succeeded, I think, somehow. So, and actually the ambitions would be to replicate this, so to say this is not only Barcelona, Hamburg, but how about, for example, the local digital twin, which is the next big thing. It's like the smart city used to be some years ago. How about we make really this data owned by the people for the public interest, and then we develop sustainable innovation and European interoperable digital services. Think about it. Why don't we have a pan-European transport app that works everywhere you go as a European citizen, where your data is protected, your digital ID is protected, you have a payment system, maybe a digital euro that preserves your privacy, and you can have this working throughout Europe? Why don't we do it? Because as you know, we are very dependent on, other, like we use American technology, Chinese technology. We don't have European applications. So that's what we need to do. And I really think that, just to maybe a little provocation also for the title of the event, for me, this is not about technology. It's not about artificial intelligence or cloud or the blockchain or here or that. Of course, the technology is critical infrastructures, and of course, it's important to get it right. But I think we have to start from the big challenges we are facing. We have to really have impact on mobility, climate, housing, on what matters to people. I think that our agenda is not technology. Our agenda is improving people's life, having this stuff working for people, more democracy maybe, and the technology should be aligned to this purpose, should serve this purpose. If the technology doesn't serve that, well, this is not right. There is something wrong with the technology, or maybe with the business model or the ownership structure of that technology. So going forward, I think, since we're going to discuss this topic, obviously I also contributed to the UN program, Cities for Digital Rights Coalition. And now there is a very interesting project going on, which is the Global Observatory of Urban Artificial Intelligence, where many cities are working on. And they're building an algorithm register, which I think is very important, because it's something we also advise the city of Hamburg to do, which is a use case of what's happening. So a register, but also use cases, because all the time we do use cases, we start from scratch. This is not possible. We need a register of use cases, and also then they have to be interoperable, so we can use the same standards, and cities can collaborate on different use cases. Right, so now there is a lot of text, but I will try to be very quick, because this is some condensed, let's say, learnings that I want us to think about. So I think we should build digital cities that are based around data sovereignty, so where we have democratic control of data and artificial intelligence. It's about, of course, democratization of data, citizen participation, and putting the technology of the service of the green transition. So the first point is, why don't we integrate these policies, for example, data sharing clauses or data sovereignty clauses, in public procurement contract? this is something we can do. And I know public procurement is not sexy. It's not a topic that you really want to discuss in the afternoon in Berlin, but it's how cities work. I mean, we pay taxes, we have 70% of the budget, it goes in public procurement contracts or in tenders. Or, for example, KFV, your local bank, I mean, your investment bank, they give a lot of money to smart cities. Why don't they mandate that this data has specific clauses, that is shared, that there is sovereignty, privacy, ethics by design? This should be mandated in the way we spend public money. And it should be part of the local digital policies. Then the data, net zero, and democracy, well, that's what I've been telling you. We should combine the technology agenda with the environmental agenda. This is not happening because if you look in cities and also at national level, federal level, they work in silos. So you go to the climate minister, to the environmental minister, and they usually don't know anything about data and artificial intelligence, or very little. And then you're like, okay, but technology should serve to solve that problem. So let's put really the question, the social and environmental challenges first, and then we use technology. And yeah, let's build a common repository of use cases with common standards, and also set up data intermediaries for the public interest. I'll talk about it in a moment. And then, yes, collective intelligence for democracy, because I think we should always start from the citizens and the communities. So 2 words, because I think my time is probably up, about the European context. So I still believe that, our strength is to build this kind of vision as Europe. Like, we should believe, we start from the ground up, from community cities, but at the end, the ambition is to make sure that Europe is not just a bit lost, yes, in this kind of conversation. And as we know, we are looking at some trends, in particular with this geopolitical dimension today, which are very tough. I mean, this is like the chips war. If you haven't read this book, I strongly recommend it, by Chris Miller. It's really fantastic to understand what's happening with chips. Of course, the generative AI and how do we regulate it, the concentration of power in the hands of very few companies. Always less and less companies, and then the quantum race, and of course the kind of dominance, let's say almost the kind of new Cold War between the US and China about who's controlling the chips, the artificial intelligence, quantum computing, who is making the rules of the new kind of global order. I think that the European way has a lot of potential, and I still believe that, although we have to hurry up. I mean, we have to make things happen, because we can be leading innovation, but aligned with our democratic values and putting real citizens at the very center. And this should not just be some regulatory model, should not just be words. Of course, we have a new constitution for the digital age with all the different, Digital Service Act, Digital Market Act, the Governance Act, the AI Act, GDPR, and so on. Sorry about the buzzword almost, but these are important regulations if we apply them well. And then there is the question of who is going to apply them, because we can't just regulate the big tech from the US and the Chinese champions. We need, to have our technology in Europe, and we need to have our capacity in Europe to make things happen and regulate according to our standards. And one part that I think it's very exciting is the question of a new approach to data management. When we talk about artificial intelligence, we have to take care about the governance of data and how we manage data. That keeps the trust of citizens and consumers. And I think we can establish a new approach to data management, decide who has the right to access the data, for what purpose, for whom, and make it easier really for people to say, I want to be in control of my data, but, who can access the data, for what, on what purpose, and give rights to people about our data. So protecting our information self-determination, but at the same time using data for innovation. This is, I think, the big challenge we are facing. And then we have the European data spaces, and also lots of infrastructures. I don't know if you know that the exascale computing, which is all publicly funded in Europe, we have a lot of facilities and infrastructure. I think you have it in Dresden and other cities. Now the Commission by law opens it up to startups and innovators, so you can use that facility in order to test your products, which I think it's a very important thing to do. of course, and I go closing here, closing soon. Of course, we are facing a lot of political and ethical implications about AI. So this conference still is about AI, and I think later you will discuss a lot of practical applications. But if we look at the big picture, here I put a lot of things on the table, from the need to tackle the big tech concentration of power. I'm kind of worried. I mean, if you think about it, that only 3 companies in the planet, which actually are the big tech companies which have the big infrastructure, the exascale computing, the hyperscalers, they control the chips, they control the integrated platform. They are taking all the knowledge produced by humanity, and with this knowledge, they're creating artificial intelligence for their own profit. Do you think this is going to work if only 5 companies own the digital economy? Do you think this is going to work for all of us? I think this is basically impossible. And so we have a very important question of power, then, of course, a threat to democracy and misinformation, disinformation, questions about copyright, questions about workers' rights in the gig economy, many different issues. And we still don't really know how these algorithms work and who should be able to expect this algorithm, how we can make them accountable to the public. So I think that also there with the new AI Act, I know you had a big debate also here in Germany because, of course, it was a little bit strange. On one side, the government's wanting to have more opt-out, to do more surveillance and to do more police security, predicting policing and these kind of things. At the end, this was avoided also because lots of, good privacy advocates, good human rights NGOs were on the table and tried to lobby against that. And on the other side, we had very few companies that said, well, sorry, you don't really need to regulate us, otherwise we can compete with the big giants. I think at the end we found the middle ground, and it's a positive agenda where, again, we can try to design and govern, as you said at the introduction, this data and artificial intelligence for the common good. But my advice here is we have to move beyond regulation. So regulation is okay, but not enough. We have to make things working. We need the technology here. We need the services. We have to show that this vision that we write in the regulation it's possible, that it works. And I think that's like the big challenge we have. So sorry, I don't make this mistake because it's very weird. It's actually, well, the other way around. Okay. Right, so I leave it here. And basically, these are a lot of kind of keywords, yes? But I really think we need a model, a European innovation model that should start from cities and citizens that go beyond the big tech, the Silicon Valley model that we see, and we are a bit stuck with all these technologies, and the big state, which is the Chinese model, all the data aggregated, controlled centrally, and social credit scoring, all this stuff that wouldn't be compatible with a liberal democracy. So we need our own way, which I call the big democracy, which I think we can frame as a social contract for the digital and the net zero age, so really combining the digital with the tackling the climate emergency, and the bet to govern data and artificial intelligence in public interest. So it is basically an innovation model that starts from the ground up, that guarantees the democratic participation of citizens and workers, protect the environment, our data, and the fundamental rights. And I think if we don't make these just words, but we put them in policy, in contracts, in projects, we make sure we build an ecosystem around those kind of values and this kind of vision, then I think maybe in some years' time, we will have less pollution, we will have, a better cities, more democratic, but also technology that really serve the people and not just a few companies. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Franchesca. I think we have time for 1 or 2 questions. I think we have microphones ready on the side. Microphones. Oh yeah, this. Kann ich eins von denen nehmen sonst? Sorry. So who had a question? In the front here, please, and briefly state your name and your affiliation so we know. Thank you.
I don't think it's working. No, it's not working.
Yeah,
yes,
no, it's working. Great.
My name is Nastya Koro. I work as user researcher in urban mobility area, and I'm very curious to hear more about the Hamburg project. What exactly did you achieve there? You said it was a success. So tell us more, please.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we take the second question. Yeah, just behind you. Yeah, great.
Alessia Lukman, startup, Geopart Agriculture, and actually everything about what you were talking we do in practice. But my question is, on your opinion, how could startups work more with government and not just with big companies or private persons, but with governments? Because based on my experience, bureaucracy kills everything. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we will have time for other questions later because Franchesca is staying for the networking part as well. Okay, so please hand the microphone back.
Okay, so thank you. Yes, so Hamburg. Okay, in Hamburg we achieve, let's say, two main things, two main goals. First of all, you can actually see the report that details everything we've done, how we've done it. So it's not just a policy report. I think it's more like a blueprint. So we show, okay, what happened, what we achieved, what was wrong, so it's very honest, let's say. So on one side, we did the Urban Data Challenge, and that was a competition to solve, basically, during the pandemic, they were creating lots of pop-up bike lanes in the city of Hamburg, but also they wanted to monitor, as in terms of possible regulation, micro-mobility flows. So, which I think it's very interesting because it's like algorithmic regulation kind of model. So if you don't have the data, you don't know where they're going, where they can park, how you regulate it better. So basically we did a competition, and we, in this competition, we asked the companies, whoever wanted, as companies, could be IoT companies, mobility companies, big transport companies, to share the data with the city of Hamburg in order then to transfer the data. So it was like private to public to society, that's how we call it, to transfer and open up the data for startups, university teams, whoever wanted to solve the challenge. So first of all, as I was telling her before, the city of Hamburg didn't really know what a challenge was because this was a new form of doing things, exactly because bureaucracy kills. So usually if you want to work with the city as a startup, you need to go through a procurement process that's very long and very time-consuming and probably difficult to win. So we were saying we don't need to, in order to test, let's do a challenge. So the challenge was already a kind of innovation internally. But the difficult thing, where we basically had to create a big team of experts and so on, was this data sharing for public interest. So how to do the data sharing, keeping the rights of the companies, but also the rights of privacy. And that's where we did a lot of work with like a multidisciplinary team. So you can basically learn, at the end we learned that you have to built a data trust, which is our next possible project, like a data intermediary. But this data intermediary should have as a purpose to do things also in public interest. Because if the data intermediary is just a companies that want to make money out of data, you basically don't solve any problem. So in terms of mobility, it was very simple. It was like analyzing the flow of the micromobility and then creating more bicycle path, basically. That was the objective, to make more sustainable mobility. But the difficult part was that the urban challenge was done with these data sharing clauses. And so we learn everything, how to do it. So now it's replicable. I hope that they do clauses in public procurement contract. This is what we tell them to do. And we also hope that we can have the first maybe data intermediary for public interest that's going to be built, because in mobility also that will be very, very important to do. The second question, yeah, I mean, a little bit I have responded that I think, well, there are a lot of things, of course, that startups can do with governments, but I think it's the it's like it is very difficult to participate in big procurement contracts. So maybe she will talk about it later, because she told me, I didn't know, there is a new law, for example, also in the state of Hamburg, that makes it easier to integrate the innovative solution into the infrastructure of the city without going through those kind of procurement. I think that would be great. There is a mechanism that's called pre-procurement or innovative public procurement, which should make it a bit easier. But I think the point is also that if something works, how do you scale it? That is the big question. Because if you only do small things, and I mean, it's nice to kind of try out, but obviously this is not a business case for a startup. So we need to go, and we need to go European. So what worked in my work very much was when you do the challenge, for example, Berlin together with Barcelona, together with Madrid, together with Helsinki. Let's assume we do this kind of European challenges, and then the startups can bid at the end. If you do it well, you already have a European market. So I think that those kind of things can really help to collaborate more. So I call it in my presentation public-private people partnership, because the public-private partnership is also always people have the feeling that, you know, we give a lot of public money to companies and then we don't know what these companies are doing with this money, and this is not good. So I think this kind of public-private and people partnership is you have to be also accountable and kind of give back. So giving back and show the returns and show the sustainability and show you've done something positive also for everyone, which I think is important, yeah.
Thank you so much, Franchesca.
Thank you.
Yeah, I've worked with procurers across Europe, and it is quite difficult. There is one project called AI for Cities that has been a collaboration of 6 European cities that might be interesting to some of you to check it out. And I think I really appreciate you opening up our event today, highlighting the importance to think also not just about data and climate, but also about democracy. I think this is really a triangle that we have to think together. All right, let's focus on one specific example where artificial intelligence is applied to tackle a problem that is linked to climate change. I'm thrilled to introduce you to Miriam Regal. And Miriam is a senior product manager at the Technology Foundation in Berlin. And it's a nonprofit foundation that drives the digital transformation of Berlin's administration, education, culture, and business sectors. Miriam is passionate about building products that solve problems people care about, again, putting people in the center. And she has been working at this intersection for over 8 years now, in both London and Berlin. So, Miriam, the stage is yours.
Is this on? Yeah. You can hear me, cool. Hello, everybody. Thanks, Josephine, for the introduction, and also to all the organizers for having me here today. I'm thrilled to talk to you about our project Q-Trees, or in long quantified trees. But before I do that, let me maybe quickly not introduce myself. That's been done by you. But actually the work we do and how this project came about. Because I work at the Technology Foundation Berlin as a senior product manager, but we do have a project called City Lab Berlin, where I do digital prototyping on various different projects. City Lab is Berlin's public innovation lab. We see ourselves as a place for collaboration between the administration, the public service sector, so to speak, and the science and business sectors, and obviously the civic society as well, to develop ideas in order to improve the quality of life for the people of Berlin and also Berlin's public service. This year we will be celebrating our 5th anniversary, and of course you're all invited. No, but seriously, feel free to drop by. We're based at Platz der Luftbrücke. You can always visit our interactive exhibition on our latest digital projects, and we also host a bunch of big events for the wider public throughout the year. So feel free to just check out our website. How do we come up with these ideas? What do we do exactly? Well, we have a prototyping team I'm part of. So digital prototyping is really our strong suit. We have a great team of software developers and designers. And we follow the principle public money, public code. So our projects are all open source. We also care a lot about open data as well. And we focus on public innovation. So we also have a team of service designers who have been publishing great resources on public service design, how to launch innovative projects. And they also do a lot, not only creating resources, but also transferring this knowledge to the administrative workers in giving workshops and really showing them the ropes, how to actually get this done themselves, right? So with always the goal to actually empower them to launch these projects as well. So back to Q-trees, which is why I'm here to talk to you about today. Obviously, I want to put our focus now on trees. They play an important role when it comes to creating low carbon cities, as they absorb the carbon from the air during the process of photosynthesis. And in a nutshell, Q-trees is about an AI-based prediction model to optimize the watering of city trees. So that's basically, to sum up the project, we've partnered up with Birds on Mars, which is an AI agency here based in Berlin. And Marcus is somewhere in the room. He was involved with this project with us, together with 2 greenery departments from the city of Berlin, the districts Berlin, Mitte and Neukölln. Q-trees is now finished as of September last year, but is funded by the ZUG on behalf of the environmental department, actually, of Germany. And so, yeah, back to the problem we wanted to solve. How can we up with this project idea? So trees have been around for, I think, more than 300 million years, right? They are very resilient plants. They have seen and managed big crises, so they should be able to cope with a lot of different stuff. And this is allegedly the oldest tree in Berlin, which is called the Dicke Marie. As you can see, as of last summer, I verified that it's still there. So all good, but something has changed. The climate has changed, obviously. And trees are affected by direct effects of climate change. I won't bore you with any graphs on that. I'm sure you've all seen this. In a nutshell, temperatures are rising. I think 2023 was the hottest year on record. On top of that, we have changing precipitation patterns. So, for example, I'm trying to focus this now a bit on Berlin because this is where we work. The drought in 2018 and again in 2022 can still be seen by experts on our city trees as of today. So, of course, there are these negative effects on the environment. But on top of that, city trees in particular face additional challenges when it comes to an urban context, right? And I brought some of these examples here with me today. So think about small tree pits, misuse of tree pit by littering, and then also soil compaction. They all lead to the trees not being able to absorb as much water as they should. Together with salt due to urine, road gritting now in winter, and then, of course, in summer, sunlight reflection by skyscrapers. So this is obviously not good, and these are the consequences, as you can see. So the numbers aren't looking good. Trees are drying up, and from the Berlin administration, we know that during the last 10 years, I think, 30,000 trees were planted, but 60,000 trees had to be cut down. Not all due to drought stress, of course. It's more complex than that, but numbers aren't looking good, right? And so we know that the greenery departments in Berlin, they are already doing as much as they can, but we thought to ourselves, isn't there anything we can do to help? So this is where Q-trees comes in. So as I said at the beginning, quite an interdisciplinary approach to the problem. So we have AI experts, we had the greenery departments who really are the experts on botany, tree care and maintenance. and then us coming in with digital prototyping using user-centric methods to tackle this problem. But we also know that AI, and this is touching on what you said, Franchesca, is not a silver bullet. It's not, the sole solution to help city trees from drying up. We obviously did some research up front and talked to a lot of people to really, first of all, understand the problem. Franchesca, you also talked about use cases. We also wanted to avoid reinventing the wheel again, right? And we really noticed during our research period there are a lot of cities and a lot of organizations actually thinking about the same problem. So we really did a huge deep dive into the topic and tackled this from various different ends and did a lot of interviews and surveys to understand what's going on, which really helped us to develop a user-centric AI model. So let's talk about the model. I'm sure you've all been waiting. When is she talking about AI? So basically, what data did we use and how did this actually work as part of the project? So luckily, the city of Berlin is already using sensor data to get a better understanding of how their trees are doing, right? They're using watermark sensors. Now, I won't go into too much detail on how this works, but we thought this is a good start, but obviously it wouldn't be sustainable and too expensive to actually have sensors installed for each and every tree in Berlin, because there are 800,000 trees in Berlin. So that can't be the solution, which is why we came up with machine learning, right? Can we not let a system predict sensor values to then calculate these values for each and every tree that doesn't have a sensor installed? And this is what we did, basically. Together with some more contextual information. So we used open data from the German Weather Service, precipitation, temperature, wind speed. We also used radiation data. And then also watering data we could get our hands on. There we used two sources. So one was from the administration itself. They are collecting, it's not very structured data, let's say. It was a bit of work, but they are collecting what providers or themselves do in terms of watering activities in their districts, how many liters they put to each tree. And the same is what we're doing with another platform or project of ours, which you might have heard of. It's called Gießen Kiez. It's a participatory platform for the interested civic society to get involved and actually log the watering. So whenever they help during dry seasons in summer, for example, we have a really active community. They can log how much water they put to a tree, and this is then all captured on the platform, and that's data we used for the model. So on top of that, we used what we call tree master data. Actually, the city of Berlin has a lot of open data sets, which is great. So I added the link here. You can hop onto daten.berlin.de and check this out. There are some open data treasures, and we obviously made use of that tree master data because it's quite important to know how old the tree is and how high and how big the tree pit is, for example. This is also what we informed the model with. And then last but not least, we calculated a shading index. That's a bit of a USP of the model, so to say, which kind of tells us how many hours per day the tree is standing in the shade. And we used free data as well, open data from the city of Berlin based on the evaluation model of the city, and obviously the course of the sun throughout the day, And so that is giving us a clear idea on how much % per day the tree stands in the shade. So we take all that data and put it into our regression model, which ironically is called random forest, to then get a nowcast, which is a snapshot of the current water supply for each and every tree, and a forecast that looks ahead into the future, 2 weeks' time. And of course, we didn't stop there, so we developed the model with the great expertise from the birds on Mars. And then how we came in as the technology foundation is that we developed 2 additional web applications that use this data. So one is an expert dashboard, which is targeting the greenery departments, right, to give them a dashboard, a database to really optimize their watering activities. And yeah, if you're interested, I'm happy to show you these applications after my talk. I'll be there at the stand, and you can have a look. But as you can see, they have a district view with a map. They have some widgets on weather, on the shading. They can export a list of selected trees. They can apply filters. So this was for the administration. And the second application we developed is called Baumblick, which is for the interested civic society. It's up online. You can check it out. And it has the same database and basically is there to inform the people on this topic, raise awareness, and obviously also get them involved. So whenever they find a tree that is in need, they can hop onto Geest and Keats and water this tree. And it has some more details on explaining the model, additional stories, what sensors we used and how they work, and things like that. So yeah, I guess 3 key takeaways for you as part of this project's learnings we've had over the course of 2 years. One, I mentioned at the beginning already, AI is not a silver bullet and will only be one piece of an overall solution. I think that's really important. It's all about an interdisciplinary approach and really doing deep dives and always being aware that to tackle these complex problems within a city context, you really need experts, and you need to have that knowledge on various different disciplines. Second, the prediction is only as good as the data itself. So we learned that the model's predictions basically are plausible and make sense. So when it rains, the values go down, and when there are dry periods, the values go up, which is what they're supposed to do. But over the course of the project, we've been struggling with poor data quality, failure of sensors. So we would really need much more data to train the model. And we have some ideas on how to improve the model further and setting specific focus. But yeah, at the end of the day, it's all down to the data available, which you touched on as well. And third, the key decision makers need to be on board in order for these solutions to get integrated, to become sustainable applications. The administration, for example, the public service sector can benefit from. Yeah, because otherwise it's just not scalable and it can't be rolled out. So as an example, the expert dashboard is currently used by 2 districts, and we put a request to the Senate for the Environment in Berlin and asked for this application to be rolled out Berlin-wide to then really use this and leverage the application, make it a joint effort. But of course, yeah, it's dependent on decision makers there to go the next step, so to speak. That's all from me. Again, as I said, you can find me at the stand after the panel discussion, I guess, with any questions or yeah, ideas maybe as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Miriam. It's really great to see the progress of the project, and I'm very excited to see how it's going to be in the future. I think it's also a testament to show that, yes, we can have great technological ideas, but at the end, it's also about understanding the institutions that have to make certain decisions, that have to have a certain expertise and capacity. So with that, let's dive a little bit deeper, and I welcome my panelists, Katrin, Nicolas, and Robert. Please join me on stage. Yeah, don't be shy. Just join me here. Wonderful. Let me briefly introduce all three to you, starting with Katrin. You're a researcher, writer, and consultant on technology, climate, and justice. And you advise organizations on data, equity, and emerging technologies. And you are currently a senior program manager at the Green Web Foundation and chair of epicenter.works. Previously, you also co-founded and co-led Motif, which is a think tank working towards social justice in the digital age. And you also, and this is something I'm very much interested in, also the co-initiator of Feminist Futures. And you also hold a master's in data and society. Welcome, Katrin. And to my left, I've Robert. You are an entrepreneur, a futurist thinker, and smart city expert. You are the CEO of Breeze Technologies, which is a German industry leader in air quality sensors, data and clean air action intelligence. And you founded that in 2015, so lots of experience there. You hold a background in computer science, and you worked for multiple international consultancies in strategy and digitalization. And you are also the European Climate Pact ambassador, so and also advisor to Urban AI, who is one of the hosts of the events today. So welcome, Robert. And last but certainly not least, Nicolas, you are a final year PhD candidate and incoming postdoc at the intersection of urban planning, climate change mitigation, and geospatial machine learning. You are based at the Mercator Research Institute for Global Commons and Climate Change, as well as the Technical University here in Berlin. You are also founding member of Climate Change AI, another partner organization to this event. This organization aims to facilitate work at the intersection of machine learning and climate change. It's a really great online community as well. And you've, for instance, served there as a content committee chair and board of directors. So welcome, Nicolas. A brief note to all of you, just a little bit of housekeeping. I will start by asking them a few questions, and then after a while, I will open it up also to you to come in with your questions. Okay? Great. Let's dive right in. Why are you excited about AI and climate change? Why is it interesting to you? Katrin, start us off.
Thank you. So I originally worked quite a lot on digital rights, so privacy, data protection, and also bias in AI. So I see myself coming from the digital rights community across Europe, but also across the world. And what I noticed within the community in the last few years was actually that there was very little talk about climate and also about the environmental harms of technology more broadly. So I was very interested in exploring this intersection, particularly between digital rights and climate justice, because I saw that there is some kind of similar topics that these movements are working on, but there is not really a lot of connections between these topics. And one such topic definitely is AI. So moving from bias in AI, that's, for example, bias against women or people of color in AI, also towards looking at bias that might emerge in environmental data, but also the other way around. So I was really interested in this intersection, and that's what made me very excited and also made me join the Green Web Foundation. Yeah.
Wonderful. How about you, Robert, from a business perspective? Why is this intersection so interesting?
Yeah, so I mean, as you already said, I do have a background in technologies. I previously worked in a couple of consultancies, mainly in the health and consumer goods sector. And I can still remember in 2014, I was living and working in Istanbul, and I was there during winter. And whoever has been in Istanbul in winter already probably knows they have a huge problem with air pollution. And you could see it every day outside, and that kind of brought me first to this field of environmental data and environmental conservation. And I was hugely distressed figuring out that there was little to no data available, and that the city wasn't really making any data-driven decisions on their climate action and on their air quality action plans. So with that, having discovered that, and with my background in mind, I thought, okay, I do know technology. I can somehow wiggle myself into environment. Maybe this is a field where I can actually do some good.
Doing some good. That sounds great. How about you, Nicolas, a researcher? What's your perspective?
So my interest actually didn't come from myself, but actually from my supervisor or joint PhD supervisor, who had this idea to combine climate and AI and cities, and proposed me to do a PhD on this. And I was like, that sounds actually very interesting. That was 6 years ago. And at that time, we didn't know so much about this very much intersection. So that was an exciting space to explore. With, I think, the intuition that, cities are quite complex beasts to work with in terms of, changing the infrastructure. But also, there seems to be so much data happening now, more and more in cities, and with the new computing tools. So there seem to be really this nice opportunity that seems to be underexplored, which is what researchers like to dig into.
Yeah. And what are some of the examples that you've encountered in your 6-year journey so far? Like, can you share some examples with us how to use AI in urban planning? Like, what role could it play there?
Yes, so one thing we've been dedicating a lot of time is to try to understand how to form information we have on cities, so geospatial information, maps, that in themselves don't contain so much information that you could use for sustainability planning. They're just maps, right? Try to understand how are these related to sustainability metrics, such as distance traveled by people with different modes, or temperature in cities that are important to trees that we just heard, or different uses in the building stock, such as heating. So we've been spending a lot of time trying to use machine learning to learn from what we call urban forms, so the infrastructure of cities, how this can be related to these different metrics. So how, for example, the form of a city, if it's more or less spread out or more or less compact, can have an impact on whether people will travel more or less with cars or with other modes, and whether this can be fed back into the policy planning. So this is something where this is still relatively early research, but this builds on quite some theory also from like the urban planning perspective, and this is one of the exciting aspects we've been working on and where there can be innovation.
Yeah. Maybe, Robert, you mentioned the problem of air pollution. So at Bria's Technology, how do you solve that? I'm sure that we are all really curious. It's such a big health crisis.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, the first big problem that we identified, or that I back then saw, was that there was no data, right? So we, back in 2014, the only way really a city could capture some air quality data was these big monitoring monstrosities, I like to call them. So they are like container-sized measurement equipment that you put on the side of the street, and They also are horrendously expensive. I know of city developers that spend upwards of $1 million for one monitoring station. And obviously this doesn't scale. So we thought with the advances that we had back then in the Internet of Things and AI and other new technologies, why don't we try to miniaturize air quality monitoring technologies and put that in the size of basically a water bottle like this and try to put this on the street sides. And this is exactly what we've done. We developed low-cost, small-scale sensors that you can put on street lights, that you can put on anywhere in the city, and that basically allow you to create scalable air quality monitoring networks throughout your urban landscape. And that, in turn, then feeds into a data repository that can either help just to create transparency for the average citizen, which is exactly what I was looking for back then in Istanbul. But secondly, we said, okay, once we know how air quality is distributed, not only in 2 points in the city, but actually in hopefully 2,000, we can turn information that we have about, let's say, changes in traffic, changes in the city architecture, about cleaner actions that get implemented. We can use all that information to train an AI to kind of start forecasting what actually positively and negatively influences air quality in your city. So we're trying to move this currently still very experience-driven air quality science, cleaner action management, into a frame where it's basically driven by data and driven by past successes and failures instead of the gut feeling of the city manager in question.
Yeah. So you work a lot also with urban planners, with decision makers in cities, right?
Yes, it's with urban planners, decision makers in cities. Of course, you always also have to keep in mind the kind of political realities that you have when we present what our AI says is helpful in regards to air quality and what isn't. There's often a reality check as well, what is actually feasible in that city or not. But we were pretty successful. So there's an example in a small city around, I think, 30,000 inhabitants in Germany. They had some big problems of air pollution, not from their own cityscape, but from surrounding larger cities. And we helped them with the AI-generated recommendations to bring to improve air quality by around 70%.
That's a significant number, yeah. Katrin, you've been involved in many international collaborations, and you ran a fellowship program around digital rights and climate justice. So from that perspective, when a city would use a digital technology such as AI in climate action, what should we keep in mind?
Good question. Yeah, quite a lot. So we're running this fellowship program called Green Web Fellowship, but also we are part of a coalition that's called Green Screen that works particularly on digital rights and climate justice. And what we kind of noticed in these communities, like really looking at AI also from a global perspective, was that there were a lot of parts of how AI is actually built and then developed that are kind of not really taken into account. So starting from the resources that AI needs. So like, for example, rare earths that are very often mined in the so-called global south, that very often displace communities and particularly indigenous communities currently, to the development of data centers. Data centers right now emit around 2% of the global energy demand. The projection is definitely that it's increasing. And they also have a massive amount of water usage. So, for example, there was a data center by Microsoft planning to be built in the Netherlands that a researcher found out that they were planning to use actually drinkable water to cool down the data center. So also the question around really water resources is a really, really big question. And then also to the deployment of AI and how much energy it uses just in general to use AI models. That's really another question when we're thinking about AI, deploying it in cities, but also very often on international or global levels that, needs a lot of energy and also can cause certain harms, both environmental and social harms. So I think we really have to keep that in mind. And there's a lot of questions also around data. I can highly recommend you this article by April Glaser in Slate magazine that kind of brought me to this whole topic. It's called Why Birds and Plants Need Privacy Online Too. It's a very good article because basically she found out that also poachers, for example, use citizen science applications to find rare birds or plant species. So also here is the question of data, not only about humans, but also about the city and the people who live in the city. So a lot of big questions that we don't have a lot of answers to, and that's also why we're running this fellowship program with people from around the world to exactly work at this intersection and see where are the potentials, where are the sweet spots also for innovation, but what do we also have to keep in mind and be aware of when deploying such a big technology as AI.
Yeah, thank you, Katrin, for this. I really appreciate you highlighting that we have to understand AI much more than something that is up in the digital cloud, but actually something that has a life cycle, that impacts people. And we have to figure out how to better monitor those impacts and how to remedy them as well. So I want to come back to when we apply AI. So you mentioned the sensors you put in place in cities. What happens next? Where does the AI come in there?
Yeah, so we use AI in a couple of places. First of all, in the calibration of the sensor data, because low-cost sensors have inherently some issues with data quality that you need to manage. We have characterized, and this is one of the great things that AI can do, we have characterized the kind of patterns of, let's say, different changes in humidity and temperature and in cross-sensitivities for different air quality parameters. Like if you say air quality, you're not only talking about one general measurement, you're talking about particulates and ozone and nitric oxides and many other chemicals in the air. And they all influence each other. So we use different AI methodologies like random forest we've seen earlier to kind of mitigate these cross-sensitivities and kind of calculate a true measurement from these various measurements that we're getting from our sensor array. And then, and this is why I like the example of the poachers, there's also the counter example there. We have recently built an AI algorithm that interprets the air quality data that we capture in real time and identify fires, or especially biomatter burning. And originally, this was planned to identify large-scale wildfires in real time, and we are doing that here in the Harz Mountains in Germany, for instance, as well as also in Canada and in the US. But we have also figured out that we can use this to find illegal campfires. So what one of our partners, the environmental NGO Wilderness International, is now doing in the Peruvian rainforest, they have a part of the forest there that is protected by them. They have put up a couple of our sensors, and they can now identify traces of human activity, like illegal poachers that are starting campfires. And if they see, okay, there seems to be a campfire going on there, they're sending out their guardians to find the poachers before they kill an animal or fell a tree. And by using AI on these data sets, you always first need the data to be able to use AI or to build an AI. You can create some great examples of public value like that. The fire detection, the recommendations for cleaner actions that I previously talked about. And I'm of the opinion that in all this data that somehow we're producing every day in our kind of public space, I think there's still going to be a lot of examples there that we can't even envision nowadays. When we started with air quality, we never imagined that we could also use the same data to identify wildfires. Wildfires are usually done by satellites or watchtowers with cameras. And so I think, independent on what kind of urban data we're talking about, there's probably going to be some smart researcher or some smart startup that figures out some other use of the data that can be for the public good in the end.
Yeah. On this note as well, I think that this is kind of the chicken-egg problem. Like, do we want to define the problem we're trying to solve first, or do we just want to get as much data as possible and then look at it and see what are the problems that we could fix with it? Katrin, you wanted to come in? Yeah.
No, I just really like your example because it's so like kind of weaves the thread also back to Francesca's point of like having this really embedded in democratic systems as well, because this data can be very sensitive data as well, environmental data, so air pollution, for example, or also there's this great research on shade, urban shade. So the more shade you have by trees, the richer the area is, for example. So you can have a lot of, you can learn a lot about neighborhoods and also about people who live there. And that's why it's really central to speak about democracy and then embedding these technologies within the democratic systems and like really trying to uphold democracy, because if not, this can be really fast also abused in another way. And I think that's really the point I want to make, seeing this intersection between digital rights and also climate justice. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, and I want to stick with this point on data a bit more. Nicola, like, can you elaborate a bit more the type of data that we need to actually build ML-driven models? What's been your experience also with availability of such data across European local governments? Yeah.
Yeah, so I can talk about one large example we did during my thesis, which was to build a European scale database of building stocks, so all single and individual buildings that can be defined in space, so with their footprint, so where they are located, and some additional information. And so I said earlier that some research we do is to try to link this urban infrastructure to the energy demand in cities. So we had this basic idea at the start of my thesis, the volume and the location of a building and a few other things should help us infer what's the demand for heat in these buildings. And then this, if we can know it at the European level, this can be very interesting to inform European policies on how to retrofit buildings and things like this. And we had the relatively naive idea that no, there's data everywhere, such as OpenStreetMap, and then we will just deploy a model based on this. Turns out that we quickly realized that we didn't have enough data to do this because there were holes everywhere. And it essentially took us the work of several PhD students for several years to come up with a database. And at the end of the day, at the end of my PhD, this project is not over, and it probably requires actually a team of 10 people and more. So yeah, the role of data is very crucial here, and I think from this experience, like understanding from the start of the project whether the data is actually good enough, because we can actually run some models and say something, but there's so much uncertainty in our results that actually we don't want to go to the policymakers and tell them retrofit this and that building if the results are not good enough. And it goes a bit back to this point on technology. Like, it's not about we really want to use AI to do something. If the models is not good enough and doesn't inform the decision, then we don't want to use this model. And then we have to go back to, okay, what is the data that we actually need? Because this model we would use to infer, this data that we use to in a machine learning model to predict energy demand is something that we infer because we don't have the actual measurements. So like there is a whole lot of data that could actually be sensed earlier or that could be put together earlier. So in the end, our model is a bit more of like a quick fix. So I think there's all this discussion to have, and what data is important. Also, not only from one city to another city, because all this data we've been using are often generated from different entities, and how they can be more interoperable between different states, for example, in Europe. That is very important to so that we really have a data infrastructure that can be used for European policies.
Yeah, I think this notion of data availability and also checking the quality of the model before actually putting it out there and working towards implementation or finding recommendation, I think that's very much aligned with also what Miriam was saying. There needs to be another iteration there. So how do we decide when it is a good idea to use AI and when to maybe use another approach? Which principles do we put in place? Like, how do we figure out when it is market ready, when the data is good enough? Who wants to take this one?
I mean, first one has to start with the simplest method. So obviously not try to deploy a very complex model based on no data, but like prototype in a small area with a little bit of data, some linear regression, whatever. Try to see if this can work from a technical side, also if this can work in terms of like having an hypothesis, an intuition why this can work. And then also understanding how this connects with a broader context, right? So, for example, we work with, so we are trying to use AI on urban planning, looking into how to transform the urban infrastructure. But of course, the urban infrastructure is also linked with people. And I could make this super nice model that says how this is how this street and that street should be changed. But if this doesn't also include in some way the regulatory framework in like how you can do urban planning decision in this area, also how people are living there, this change will never be made, right? So it's also about, is the first step actually to understand how to change the infrastructure there with AI, or are there other changes to be done first? Mm-hmm. So it's also like thinking in general about having a theory of change that it's broader than just using the algorithm. So I would say, yes, start simple on the technical side and like be also cognizant of the broader theory of change and environment.
Yeah, I'm really curious to hear both of your perspectives there as well. And just for the audience, get ready to ask a question. I will open it up in a moment. Okay. Did you want to add to this, or maybe on the citizens' perspective, how to involve citizens in defining when to use AI to address which climate problem in the city? Yeah, how do we go about that?
So I would first of all ask, do we really need AI? And also, what's the goal behind it? So what is really, what do we really want to bring forward? So is it only efficiency and optimization, or is it, for example, a question of real participation and justice within the city? So I think what's really, really important is to ask, what's the goal of using AI? And then when we're talking about participation, I think it's really important to not only say, yeah, it's a participatory process where people can just come and join, because that also ultimately boils down to time equity. Who has actually time to go and participate in these processes? It's very often a very homogeneous group of people. So also when we're thinking about participation in the city context, I think it's really, really important to put this question of equity really at the center of deploying AI. So I think generally asking, do we really need AI to solve this problem? And then in the second step, if we do, really ensuring that participation is really centered around equity and also about reducing environmental harms.
Yeah, just to add to that, I mean, as a technologist, we use AI when we think there's patterns in the data, and that understanding of the patterns is going to help us somehow. Because in the end, AI is pattern recognition and then kind of pointing those out. I think when we're talking about when is AI ready for use, that is a kind of question and where the answer depends heavily upon the kind of cultural context that we're speaking in. I think here in Europe and particularly in Germany, as with many technologies, there's a huge hesitancy also in the public administration to kind of pick up new technology like AI and to use it for different kinds of, all kinds of different purposes. And of course, there's outliers here and there. Like I know in Hamburg, we also have the first venture client unit that now sources technology solution for the public administration, and there's a couple of other cities with good examples as well. But if I look kind of across the Atlantic to our neighbors over there, the conversations that we have had with cities when we started trying to kind of promote our solution here in Germany and Europe versus the conversations that I'm having over there are hugely different. Over here, the first questions was, does it really work? What about privacy? Do we really need this? We already have something in place. Why is it so much better? Over there, it's basically, Does it provide a value? Yes, let's try it out. And the big problem with that is if we don't try out things here in Europe and Germany, or if we kind of are very, very hesitant to adopt new tools and technologies, companies and organizations that start over in the US, the same is probably also true for China and some other markets as well, have an inherent benefit inside of them where they can outcompete companies from Europe and Germany. So while we have had big ramp-up issues in 2015 and 2016 when all the cities were asking us, does it really work, et cetera, our competitors over there who started at the same time already had the first $1 million deals and were able to ramp up their technology and develop kind of a lead technology-wise. So if we don't want to lose the ability to create organizations, companies here in Europe that kind of also follow European ideals on privacy and data protection, etc., we need to somehow make sure that we stay competitive also technology-wise. And that is one of the kind of key challenges that I see for the future of AI in cities, that we kind of can make sure that not everything comes across whatever ocean we are looking at, but that we also have some local stakeholders here that build new tools.
Yeah. So a clear call for supporting innovation. And
since we have some political decision makers here in the room as well, yes, please pick that up.
Yeah, let's talk about it later a bit more. Okay, I think we have microphones ready for questions. Okay, there was a quick arm right there. Let's start there. I'm going to take a few more. Please also introduce yourself, and if it's directed to a specific speaker, also let us know. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Valentine. I'm from Media City Babelsberg in Potsdam. I'm social entrepreneur, and I have a 400 square meter space for open to different public activities. We have now 30 activities like office gardening, yoga, urban sketchers. So like that, every community have around 100 people, sometimes 400 people. Which kind of data can I give to the city or to researcher? This is my question on all of us, I suppose.
Okay, question on how to contribute your data. Another question. Who has more questions? See one here, and then one in the back. Let's maybe do this round, and then we address it.
Hello, my name is Lucas. I'm a biotechnology student, and I have a question to Mr. Dupont. I was wondering, you said that you don't have enough data for the project. Do you think the data is available outside that you just cannot reach? And if you think the data is out already, is it more in the hand of like the government, or is the data more owned by like private companies?
Thank you for that question. There was one over here as well. And in the front, maybe you start. Yeah.
Or I can wait because I think there are like too many questions for them to keep in mind.
No, we're going to take like 2 more questions. So yeah, please ask you.
Okay, so actually I have 2 questions. So the first one.
It's clever, yeah.
So the first one would be about like how to reach people, because we're talking about data and so on. But the thing is, like, even if there are like many good initiatives, like how do you get people to know about them and also like to do something with you, like for example the urban platforms and so on. And the second one would be about the conflicts between the public administration and also the private administration. So basically, if you say, okay, me as a city with zero goal, like with a net zero goal in 2030 and so on, I want to tackle, I don't know, energy demand. But the thing is, like, if you tackle energy demand, maybe the energy provider is not happy about it, because you're gonna start making your buildings like demanding less energy. So what is maybe the European attitude about this? How to kind of make the balance between different interests?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hear you on that. Okay, final question, and then we're gonna answer it. There in the back, please.
Oh, hello, good evening. So my name is José. I am from Brazil. I am the founder of an NGO there and a PhD student here in the University of Bonn. So my question is, I have been researching a lot on AI deployment in the Amazon for the purpose of climate justice and so on and so forth. And I would like, and there are many issues related to sovereignty in the sense of where is this, who is processing this data, what about the infrastructures that are being dealt with? And so I would like to know if in your work you have, I don't know, come across this issue of who owns the data, the infrastructure, and how do you work with it? That would be really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, so we have a few questions around data ownership. Nicola, I think one of them was directed towards you as well.
Yes. So I have a lot of things to say on this question, so I won't use the next 15 minutes, but we can talk more if you want. So there are, of course, differences across the different type of data. So I've been working a lot with building data, which is relatively not privacy sensitive. So in theory, you could have quite a lot of it, and there is quite a lot of it. I mean, there are three main providers, like citizen science, like OpenStreetMap, then governments, so via cadasters and things like this, and then big tech companies. And so there's quite some data that's around, but there's also still quite some data that's in silos. On the side of governments, it can come from, for example, in Germany, there is a complex structure that each land owns their own data, and then they don't necessarily make it available. Berlin makes it available for free. Some other states require 100,000 euro or something for researchers to get access to it. So it can be tricky. And so that's the case of buildings and data that's more privacy sensitive, and that's also more coming from the industry. So in particular, mobility data, there's much less available, and it exists, but it's in silos because companies have it because they are not forced to make it in the open space because there was no one thinking about it when they made the regulations. So yeah, there's quite some data around. There's also all the satellite imagery from which we can do a lot of things, but the very high resolution one that we need to actually do what we want to do is also in silos. So it's a big process that requires actually a lot of regulation, a lot of activism to make these things change so that we actually have the data to do all the big dreams we have in terms of research and development of AI tools.
Great. And there were some questions about how can I, or if I run an organization, how can I contribute my data? Is there a pool I can put in? What are some of the formats you've come across in terms of, I guess, participatory data collection for public good? And also, how do you reach people? How do you, I guess, disseminate results or communicate also that AI might be a good solution to solve a certain problem? How do you go about that communication? Maybe Catherine or Robert?
For the communication part, of course, it depends heavily upon what you're talking about. But one example where we did an air quality project in a district of Hamburg called Rothenburgsort, we were working with the district council, which was, of course, the first very good channel that we had into the district. We recruited citizen hosts for the sensors, so we put ads out on social media targeted at people that are interested in the environment. We put flyers on the market square, calling people, hey, do you have a balcony? Do you have a front yard where we can put a sensor? You can become a host and contribute towards collecting air quality data from your district. And then we also organized regular events like workshops and citizen forums where we then talked with the people about the data that has been collected, where also, of course, the district council was then there and gave their view on the collected data and then also the actions that were taken from that. So in that sense, I think you really need to, first of all, find people at where they are, which might be online on social media, but there's also many people that are not online, elderly, for instance, often. So you also can't forget the physical world. So use billboards and other physical means of information communication as well. And then secondly, try to somehow make them active participants in this whole process, like we did with the citizen hosts and then also as contributors in the workshops that we organized. So if you can do that somehow, then also, of course, the kind of acceptance is much higher. We've seen that, for these cleaner actions that we're usually talking about, when you use the data and when you explain to the people, hey, look, this was the status quo, this was the intervention that was done, this is the tangible result that we can actually prove with data, the acceptance of cleaner actions like new speed limits or roads closed for diesel vehicles, whatever, is much higher if you actually demonstrate to people that it has a value than if you just do it and they say, okay, it comes from up there, whatever they're doing there, right? So in that sense, data and AI can also really be a great tool of involving your citizen or in your community in any kind of action in your landscape. And of course, also where to publish this data. Again, it heavily depends on what kind of data you're talking about. I know that the Transport Ministry, for instance, also has their own public data repository for everything related to mobility, which sometimes even includes environmental data. There are some great open source initiatives also in our space. For instance, Luftdatennet for open source sensors, and they also publish a lot of data online. And then I would look into whatever data you have. What are the big open source players in that field? Do they have online repositories? And you can probably contribute it there.
Yeah. So also as a startup, I guess, thinking about how to communicate what you're doing, what kind of data you want to collect, and you said activate citizens. I think that's really great. Katrin, you work on digital human rights and climate justice. Can you elaborate a little bit what you mean by that? And what are you worried about looking at AI from that perspective?
Yeah, I can also answer the Brazil. I think it's
Please,
kind of interlinked. I'm very happy about your question. Thank you so much, because Brazil is very, very interesting, and there's a lot of things happening right now, especially with the G20 also upcoming. And with the fellowship program, we really tried to explore this intersection of digital rights and climate justice. And we had in the previous cohort one really great researcher and journalist, Camila Nobrega, who was working on mega projects in Brazil and like investigating big dam projects, for example, from a feminist perspective. So I can highly recommend you her work. And also now we have Lua Cruz, who is working on connectivity questions, particularly with the Amazon, because like people have the right to be connected, and we really want to advocate for meaningful connectivity. But also there is a lot of data mining and surveillance that comes when we're thinking about connectivity more broadly. So I can also highly recommend you Lua Cruz's work. And that's really what we're looking into when we're thinking about digital rights and climate justice. Because from the digital rights community, we have quite a lot of knowledge what can go wrong with technology. And we have seen that there is quite a lot of technological solutionism out there, for example, using an algorithm for hiring because it's so much easier than actually hiring people. But there is a bias in hiring in this specific hiring algorithm. So how can we really apply this knowledge also when it comes to climate and the environment? How can we really critically ask what kind of technologies do we want? And how do these technologies also impact the societies more broadly? And I think what's really, really crucial in that is to also not forget the global perspective that we're speaking of. So if we're speaking about the European Green Deal, what does this also mean for communities from the global south who very often actually have to face lithium mining, for example, or mining of rare earths. And what does this really mean for the global community? And also, how can we connect together? So if you're interested in that, I can also really recommend you the Green Screen Coalition. And I can also recommend you Branch Magazine. That's a magazine that works exactly at this intersection, which has a lot of these cases and really looking at what's happening there. Yeah.
Thank you also for highlighting these resources. That's so valuable. In a moment, I want to open it up for a second round of questions. But before that, Nicola, as a researcher in this intersection of AI and climate, do you ever have doubts that it's maybe too risky, it's not really worth it? Like, what are your thoughts around it, if you want to share?
Sure, yes. I mean, at the intersection of AI, climate, and policy, right? So this adds a third layer of complexity and of sometimes impossibility. So yes, I mean, one aspect, of course, is when you work as a researcher, it's really at the early start of the process. So there's like, at Climate Change AI, we like to talk about this concept of pathway to impact. So from like the early idea of, we could use AI for this climate use case, like how is this going to go from this first linear regression on this first data all the way to having an impact, so having something deployed and having an impact on CO2 emissions, right? And sometimes this pathway to impact is pretty long, right? So that's something one can feel during a PhD. So of course, this creates doubts, and this also makes one to think also about like really question critically in which cases something like a model could be nice as a research paper and like could demonstrate a potential that's actually really difficult to change on the ground because of the broader context. But also, I mean, I've been reviewing quite a lot of papers during my thesis, and I've been in contact with the community in general, working on this intersection via Climate Change AI, because we organize all sort of workshops, also some special issues in journals or things like this, where you can really see that there's a lot of potential in different, like across all the different impact areas in terms of climate change, adaptation, mitigation, science. So I think, there's a lot of things to do, but also there are a lot of things that are hard to do or may not be doable. And so I think it's important to have doubts early on, and sometimes throughout the process realizing something cannot work. But just in a matter of like channeling one's energy to another one that can work, hopefully.
Yeah, I think being critical or continuously having a reflection on, does this actually work? Does this make sense? What's the purpose? What's the cost? Right? Okay, let's do another round of questions. I have one right there, and I'm going to collect like 3-4 questions again. Yeah.
Does it work? Yes.
Yes.
Hello, I'm Magda. I'm from 42 Berlin, and I would love to ask all of you a question about our, you mentioned a lot of different initiatives, and obviously there are so many different companies, so many different institutes, researchers separately trying to figure out what can we do to improve sustainability with AI. What would you say are the processes or topics that are maybe not a waste of time, but that are kind of, we don't need to be focusing on them right now? If we were to apply Pareto principle, what would we stop doing, and what would we focus on instead to make it more efficient?
Thank you so much for that. Then I have a question here in the middle and one here in the front.
Hello, my name is Rasmus. I'm a student at 42 Berlin and was a researcher at Öko-Institut before. And Katrin and others mentioned the adverse impacts, environmental impacts of like AI technologies, and especially the physical infrastructure behind it. And I'm and I kind of feel a thirst in this community, but also in many other communities for more data, more innovation, more trying out a lot of different things to see how it works. So there's a lot of demand in that regard. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on how we should actually navigate this dilemma in like net zero goal world to maybe focus, or I don't know, like who should do what to actually navigate us through this dilemma. Yeah.
Yep, thank you. And then, yes.
Hi, I'm Sophie. I'm not going to stand up because I'm in the front and people won't be able to see. I'm from the Just Tech AG. I have a very similar question, actually, and also regarding policy, sustainability, AI. You're all kind of on this intersection between innovation and sustainability, and I was wondering, how do you feel about existing EU regulations, and what would good regulation actually look like? How can we safeguard the access to data and the ability to innovate while also safeguarding social and environmental sustainability?
Yeah. And then in a final question, also here in the front. Oh, sorry. Yeah, then we take that one. Sorry.
Yeah, hi, hello. I'm learning at the moment data science and machine learning, and I will actually have like a little project that I can do for 2 weeks where I can really really dedicate myself to a project and a problem. So I was wondering, because you're here and you have all these different expertise, maybe you have a problem on your mind where you think, okay, we still don't have a solution, and maybe it would be possible to make a little prototype out of it. Thank you very much.
Nice. Okay, then the final question, a quick one.
Yeah, thanks. Hi, my name is Daniel. I work for GIZ, which is the German Agency for International Cooperation, in a project called Fair Forward, basically on open, inclusive, and sustainable AI in Africa and Asia. And I have a question regarding sort of the pathway to impact and what role open source can play. I mean, I quite like what Franchesca said about the work that you did in Barcelona and how that is picked up by other cities. So in that way, you have many sort of little, well, I mean, or not so little, but like many projects picking up that open source work. And I was wondering, from your perspective, what role can open source AI, be it the data, the models, and so on, play in that work, both positively, but also maybe from do you see any challenges in that? Thanks.
Thank you so much. Okay. So I think this notion, what should we stop doing and what should we start doing? Like, what is the problem that's on your mind, and what are things where you're like, okay, it's been done, we've been through this.
Yeah, I can start with the what should we stop doing, or maybe rephrasing it as how to prioritize. I mean, I think for me, there are two dimensions. There is the dimension of the potential and the feasibility, and the potential from the climate side. I mean, it's not completely clear, but there's something that's called the IPCC that every 6 years make a huge book, like, no, I think it's big like this, of the state of how to mitigate climate change. I mean, mitigation is this part. But it says this is what matters, this is what matters less, etc. And so that's like a good guiding idea of, like, I don't know, heat pumps compared to autonomous vehicle, blah, blah, blah. And then on the other hand, we have all this concept of smart cities where we just want to do smart things. And I have the feeling there are a lot of so this intersection between smart cities and climate change mitigation, which like people can call like smart sustainable cities. There are a lot of things that actually don't fit so well with what the IPCC is saying. So autonomous vehicles, super unclear potential. Maybe there is, but there's so many other things to do before. Using AI to reduce congestion. Like from my experience reviewing the literature, there's like a gigantic part of the literature is focusing on this. What the literature is saying, rebound effect, maybe this is actually not going to change everything or increase. So like there's so much research and deployment that's being done in areas where we know from the climate science that these are not the things that matter most. And there are so many other areas where the IPCC look in this and that direction. There's very little research. I mean, that's we've been doing some work with Josephine on that, and it's very clear. So that's what I can say. On the open source question, so like what to do? Yes, open source. Let's do open source. I mean, AI and machine learning, the uptake of AI and machine learning is a lot about open source. Like without all the open source machine learning libraries, we would certainly not be there. And of course, if there are things that different cities, like I mean, on top of the libraries, building some other software that can be reproduced by different cities, that can also be used by different researchers. That's amazing. I mean, in our group, we do everything open source, and we strongly believe in that this is a key factor. I mean, of course, then there's all the business side of things, but it can still work with open source. So I even if some parts need to be closed, obviously, but I think everyone should engage with that. So I'm a strong believer of open source.
Yeah. Open source, does one of you want to contribute to this?
Yeah, just to add to the point also, what should we stop doing? I still see a lot of public administrations, government entities spending, let's say, research money on topics that are already solved. So back in 2018, so that was 3.5-ish years after we started Breeze, there was a big call from the City of London that wanted to have a system developed, exactly what we were then doing already. And I could probably give you a list of 50 startups back then that already had a solution in market. And that in the end was 2-3 million pounds spent, I think, towards the King's College then in London to develop exactly a kind of competitive solution, but something that is then only deployed in London in the end. And we see a lot of these kind of fundings going out, not only in the air quality space, but in all kinds of public administration areas. And while, of course, it's nice then to have a local kind of project that you can show where something has been developed, you could have probably spent the same amount of money to actually procure the solution from any of the existing solution providers out there for 4, 5, 6 cities instead of just one. So it would be a much more efficient use of resources to kind of go to the market, see what's already there, and buy that instead of developing everything 10 times over.
Yeah, thinking about scale.
Yeah, it scales much better. And then in the end, of course, going into this open source, open data perspective, one thing that we have also always asked is kind of make the data open. That is something that we also try to promote in the projects that we do. Actually, for a city, it's cheaper to work with us if we can publish the data instead of if they want to kind of cover it up. Unfortunately, cities are always very afraid of what kind of air pollution they might find, so they tend to prefer to having closed data actually. But I remember. Was just 1 year before COVID, we actually asked the city of Hamburg to give us their existing air quality data from their 15 monitoring stations. I think in the end we had to pay something like €1,000, like administrative fee for the data to be sent over to us. And we were saying, hey, this has been paid for by the tax money anyway. Why do we have to pay another €1,000 to get this data? So there, I think, is a huge potential where I'm a huge proponent of having open data and making it available to the public in general, also in a machine-readable format, so that you can build cool new tools with that.
Yeah. We are slowly but surely running out of time. I want Katrin to come in on any questions that were asked in the audience, and I have a few final ones for you as well.
Yeah, about your question around regulation, I think when we're talking about digital technologies, we really have to see this intersectional. So, for example, the AI Act, there is not any mention of the environmental impact of AI right now in there, like not really, and that's really a big problem. And also with the Rare Earths Act, there is very little on digital technology and the impact the Green New Deal is going to have with the rollout of, for example, smart meters, etc. So I think this kind of intersectional perspective is very much needed on the EU regulation level. And then more in general about your question, what we can do, it's obviously a very difficult question, but I think really asking critical questions, at least that's the way I approach these topics. So do we really want to have a smart city, or do we want to have a just and democratic city, for example? And then also asking, where does the power lie listening to climate activists around the world? I mean, it's very, very clear what we have to do. For example, breaking up big oil companies. It's there is quite a lot of solutions out there, but we really, really have to also advocate for these and not just, develop technologies, which is obviously also important to embed these, but I think it's not the only solution to the bigger questions. And trees are really good.
I realize we forgot one question over there, which is maybe a bit too broad for me to answer now, because it would be interesting to know whether you're interested. I have a lot of ideas, but so we can talk after if you're interested.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. Okay. So, Robert, you've been working a lot with city administrations. And I think this question came up as well. How do we navigate the public sector realities with private sector innovation and drive and also realities? So looking ahead for the future, what role do you see for startups in this space? What do you wish for in terms of this kind of collaboration?
Well, I mean, talking from my experience here in Germany and then also comparatively in the US, I see a huge opportunity for startups to provide solutions that can kind of shake up how things are done and improve a lot of public administration processes. For instance, in Hamburg, they just integrated another AI startup called Some AI into their web pages. It kind of turns all the complicated texts that you usually have on city websites into very easily understandable texts automatically. So I think these are great kind of examples of how technology can easily be integrated and help to kind of shape the public good. I think earlier here there was somewhere some form of criticism about public procurement processes. I'm actually a fan of public procurement because in the end it's your tax money that is spent, right? You're all probably most of you paying taxes at least, and you want the money not just to be thrown out of the window, but you want it to be spent, in a kind of good way and in a way that can be kind of argued upon that it is kind of well spent. So you need some form of process that you can follow as a public administration to make sure that it's not all just buddy-buddy business, but that actually, the best bid in the end, whether that's the cheapest or quality-wise, wins. There just needs to be a little bit more eagerness, I would say, in the public administration to use all the tools that they have in regards to public procurement. For instance, not always the cheapest offer needs to win. That is, by the way, not only true for AI and technology, that is also true when you build a street. You don't need to have the construction site there for 2 years. You can have it faster, it just costs more. And I think there my big aim would be that, the public administrations get more familiar with all the kind of means they have with procurement, whether that's standard procurement processes with 3 tenders, or having to go through national tender, or going through these innovation procurement processes that also exist. And then also what I actually suggested recently in another conversation was to have a kind of central database of let's say, new governmental technology solutions that is kind of where you have a kind of framework contract with some form of entity. I back then said it could be the Bundeskanzleramt, just because I didn't have any other idea who it could be in the German government. But once you are in this catalog, cities can have A, they know, okay, it has been done somewhere before and it works, and B, there could be some form of more lightweight procurement process that you can just search in that catalog, for instance, for 3 offers and then go from there, instead of having to go through all the national or even EU-wide tender processes. So some form of tender process that still follows the kind of idea that is behind that to ensure public money well spent, but that makes it more automated and easier than what we currently have. That would be my kind of big aim for the next probably decade or so it takes to implement that.
It sounds ambitious for sure.
And then cities learning from each other based on the examples that are already out there.
Yeah. Great. Okay. Final question for you, Nicola. As a researcher, what are you excited about? Like, what do you see as next step, as like a next frontier in AI research to tackle the climate crisis?
I will speak from my geeky geospatial researcher perspective, and I think there's like a big like it's still like a small research community, but I think there's a lot of things we can do with AI, to understand better spatial data. So all things are organized in space. It's about cities, it's about ecosystems, it's about climate. So in terms of like climate science. There's like it's a new field of machine learning that just instead of just being aware of relationship is also aware of spatial relationships, and that's kind of like the research field in which I work. And I think there's quite a lot of things that can be done here, and there are already some strong use cases in terms of improving climate predictions, or in terms of improving the predictions of different quantities in forests that are important to monitor. So that's maybe not the number one thing, but that's one of the things that excite me personally.
All right, and Katrin, for you, I mean, you work at this really important intersection. Also, I mean, how do you not get overwhelmed, or what would be your recommendation for everyone joining us today, learning more about also the digital rights aspect here? What should we read? What should we learn? What should we train?
Yeah, so I highly recommend you Branch magazine. That's branch.climateaction.tech. There we have a lot of people writing and researching about these topics. Then the Green Screen Catalyst Fund website is just interesting what's happening in this community. And then always our blog and our fellows. So I know I keep you from drinks and food, so just speak to me later.
Fantastic. Yeah, thank you so much for all the panelists and also for your questions. I also want to thank all the partners who made this event possible. And with that, also thank you for everyone who tuned in online. Have a wonderful evening. And yeah, big applause.